night he came home safe from the Great War. She spent days getting ready for him. She'd never felt rich enough to spend cash money on store-bought underwear, especially since Claude was always so quick to take it off. But for his homecoming, she bought some beautiful red silk and creamy lace. She made herself a diaphanous camisole and clingy bloomers. Along with the silk, she bought some practical navy blue wool to make herself a sensible dress to wear over it. After all, the Primer of Propriety ruled. A man likes his wife to look proper in public, which worked just fine for her, because she added a short corollary, as long as she's bawdy in the bedroom. That seemed to work just fine for Claude, too. The night before he was expected, she covered her hair in sweet almond oil and washed it with lemon juice. As she pinned it up the next morning, she added a drop of jasmine scent, remembering how he loved to pull the pins out. She longed to lean over him in bed, swishing the tips of her fragrant hair across his naked chest until he grabbed her around the neck and pulled her down on top of him. Nice girls aren't supposed to enjoy sex. Now that was an example of a rule, from the Primer of Propriety, that Belle just couldn't work up any enthusiasm for at all. She figured she never would be what you call nice. The air in the depot reeked of steaming wool. She went outside in the morning drizzle, but she didn't want to ruin her new navy blue hat, so she came back and paced as the station filled up with people. "Sit down, honey," her mother-in-law said. "You're making me nervous." At 60, Effie Cantrell was a model Victorian with steel gray hair mounted unshakably on top of her head and skirts that barely cleared her high-button shoes. But Belle couldn't sit still. Not this morning. Claude was coming back to her. She was going to have him today and every day afterward for the rest of their lives. Finally, she heard the train whistle and rushed outside to peer down the tracks as the train rumbled in. Claude leaped off the iron steps in his dress uniform. Belle flew into his arms. He dropped his bags, lifted her up, and swung her around. Claude was home. She could begin to live again. She had time to whisper, "Wait until you see what I've got on underneath this dress." And he had time to whisper, "I know what you got underneath your dress, darling. I've been thinking about it for almost 2 years." As they left the platform, Mike O'Malley, who'd lost an arm and part of one leg during the war, Titus Pruitt, who owned a bicycle shop, and the mayor's son, Pruitt Walker, intercepted Claude as he helped his mother into their buggy. They invited him to a poker game that evening in the back room of the Nick's saloon. "Thanks all the same, boys, but I got plans for tonight," Claude said, slipping his arm around Belle. "Big plans." "That's what we figured," Pruitt Walker said with a smirk. Titus sniggered. "We just didn't want you to feel left out," said Mike O'Malley. Back home, Katie showed her father all the prizes she'd won in her home economics class. He told her he was proud of her. She was going to make some lucky man a wonderful wife. Miss Effie smiled. Katie beamed. Belle didn't say a word. She wanted her only daughter to go to college and take up a profession, not mend some man's socks. But Belle knew only a fool burdens the unwilling with the unnecessary. She decided to make that sentiment a rule in her Southern Girl's Guide to Men and Other Perils of Modern Life, a humorous counterpoint to the Primer of Propriety, which was what Belle called the rules of ladylike behavior Miss Effie had tried so hard to instill in her over the years and that Belle had set herself to learn. She knew the rules were for her own good. They were there to help her navigate the shoals of society. But sometimes, most of the time, she found she had to twist them a little or break them, or at least give them a permanent kink. Because no matter whether the words were highfalutin or homey, they all pretty much said the same thing. Don't. And a girl has got to live. After Katie had shown her father all her excellent report cards and sung him a song she'd been practicing for his homecoming, with Miss Effie accompanying her on the piano, Stella, their cook, called them in to dinner. She'd spent most of the week collecting ingredients for Claude's favorite dishes and had been cooking since early morning. As they spooned up the crawfish bisque, Miss Effie urged her son to tell them about the war, but he didn't say much. Over their main course of baked ham with pineapple rings and cloves, fresh butter beans, and mashed sweet potatoes, Belle asked about Paris. But Claude never had been one for talking. However, when Stella brought out her special doubled chocolate cake, he did manage to tell a couple of cleaned-up army jokes. Belle was amazed. Claude didn't go in for jokes. She'd never heard him tell one before. After they'd had dinner, Claude announced what he wanted was a hot bath. He said he'd been dreaming about their big claw-footed bathtub for 2 years. Belle turned to him and smiled. He reached for her under the table and slid his hand up her thigh with an urgency that made her jump. While her husband bathed, Belle unpacked his bag and threw all his clothes into the hamper. Something crinkled in the pocket of his dress shirt. She pulled out a letter. It was in French. His father's parents spoke Creole French, and Claude had learned it as a child. Belle couldn't read what it said, but she understood chérie and mon amour and je t'embrasse, and she knew he didn't have any cousins named Lisette. She sat down on the bed and fought to inhale. So that's what he was doing while she was raising their daughter, taking care of the farm and listening to Miss Effie prattle on. He was catting around with Lisette. She tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything. The words were out of context. There was probably a perfectly good explanation. Besides, men have their needs. At least, that's what men tell you. Wonder what they'd say if we told them women have needs, too. She knew what they'd say. She even knew the word they'd use. It rhymed with floor. She went over to the window, blew onto the cool glass, and then wiped away the little round cloud she'd made. One little fling in a foreign country didn't mean anything. Not in a real marriage. She assured herself it didn't mean a thing. Of course, she didn't know anyone who wrote letters after a fling. She emptied his bag. There were no more letters, not even one of the hundreds she'd written. He'd kept only one. This one. She felt tears well up. She willed them not to spill out. She wasn't going to be sentimental. She got up and put the letter in the bottom of his bag. As if it had fallen out, as if she hadn't discovered it. She heard the bedroom door open. She dropped the bag and turned around. Had he seen her? Claude, wearing only a towel, filled the doorway. He closed the door behind him and dropped the towel. He scooped her up. To heck with decency. He tossed her onto the bed. The bed springs sang as they had sung to them on so many nights of their young marriage. They crooned and trilled that all her needs were about to be satisfied. She wouldn't even think about the letter. He bent over her. She wouldn't even think. He was too excited for mere kisses. She felt his right hand rush and fumble with the hooks on the side of her navy blue dress. Belle had to bite her lips and remember not to make a sound. But it had been so long, so very long. Suddenly, another hand, a very unwelcome hand, rapped on the door. "Claude, George is here to see you." Sheriff George Good was Miss Effie's second cousin once removed. Claude groaned. "Tell him to come back later." His hasty hands pulled her bloomers down around her knees. "Claude Cantrell, you get downstairs this minute." The door flew open, and Miss Effie caught sight of something she hadn't seen for over 3 decades. Her son's naked bottom, and it had sprouted black hairs. Belle saw her mother-in-law's temples pulsate, saw her whip around and face the hallway. Claude Sr. had never gone to war or been away for more than a week. Belle doubted that the old woman had ever even considered having what she called relations with him during daylight hours. The dowager's voice wavered. "George is a busy man. Whatever you're doing can wait until tonight." And because we are all children in our mother's home, Claude got up and pulled on his pants while Belle shimmied back into her bloomers. "Tonight," he whispered with a raunchy wink that promised satisfaction. When Belle went downstairs, he was surrounded by relatives and neighbors on the glassed-in sun porch next to the dining room. Her mother and stepfather had shown up to bask in the reflected glory of the hero returned from the war. The rest of the day, Claude stood tall in his blue and gold sergeant's uniform. Finally, when the last visitor had gone home to supper, Belle and her husband were able to slip out of his mother's house. Claude riding Jack, his black stallion, and Belle on her roan, with Claude's hunting dog, Dog, running ecstatically at their side. Belle had named her horse Susan B. for